Greetings. Peace. How is everybody? Oh, look, my coffee's ready. Well, I guess it's not really ready yet, but it's about to be. All right. So, good evening. Greetings. This is TK Trap, aka Travis Magus, here with LVX777. Hope you guys are doing well tonight. We're going to talk about mental modifications once again because that's the subject really, and that's the definition technically of a vritti. If you notice, the book that we're studying for this month in the study group is called The Paths of Pravriti and Nivritti, the root word of that being vritti. A vritti is a mental modification, and it's these collections of mental modifications that create who we are as individuals, these personalities, and all the different characteristics and attachments that we use to define who and what we are. So a lot of questions arise from that, like what are we without those mental modifications? What has been modified? What were we before that? And is there a way to unmodify? Should we even unmodify? Or is the goal really to just reduce? So I'm going to read a chapter from a book, and this chapter is called Modifications of Consciousness and Yoga, right? And really, as I was going through it, I saw that there was a specific part called How Modifications Occur. I think that would be at least a little bit useful for what we're studying here, which is this book. And leading into the others, which would next be Karma and Karma Yoga, followed by Mantra and Yantra, which is essentially the root of summoning spirits and working with sigils, honestly. And then, of course, Jnana Yoga, which is the study of mind, right? And then finally, Samkhya Darshan before we head into mystical Kabbalah. So, if you're up for spending about an hour with me as I go over that, then you should be in for some informative information. But give me like 2 minutes so that I can pour the coffee in this coffee thing. Greetings. So, yeah. Cybernet, good to see you. Kite Mama, greetings. Society Ejects, peace, my brother. Sunshine Chick, good evening. Capri Macaluso, greetings. Alora, greetings. Alex Cuckoo, greetings. Nicole Berkeley. Unicorn Time. Court Singh, peace, my friend. Zahir Anu, greetings. CJ, good evening. A. Hello. Living in the Zone, greetings. Aset Ajah, good evening. Amar Ahmad, peace, my brother, peace. Keep growing the beard, bro. I'm not sure I can. I was actually thinking about shaving it off today. Al Dicky, peace. Moldvox, greetings. Yes, so be sure to join the study group if you haven't already, because just tomorrow, which is only a few hours from now, we're going to go over the first chapter of The Paths of Pravriti and Nivritti, which I just so happened to record the first chapter for those of you who haven't received the book yet, and for those of you who got your copy stolen out of your mailbox. But it's a really good chapter, honestly. Ever since I read it a year ago, it always stood out in my head. I thought that was a perfect metaphor for what's going on with the soul's travel, right? With the soul being a visitor in Hotel Earth and all the staff that seeks to make our accommodations most pleasant. I think that made perfect sense, honestly. And not just perfect sense, it also shows us the plight, so-called plight, that we find ourselves in. You know, why would we want to leave if everything feels good? You know what I'm saying? So I'm not gonna say the title too many times because there's only like 3 copies of this book online that I can find right now. It always was pretty rare, and I don't mean rare as in like ooh. Well, I guess it is rare, like ooh. So whenever I look for it, there's only ever like 3 copies available, and of course, you know, sometimes they're like hundreds of dollars. The 3 copies I found range between like 28 and 40. And I don't want anybody to feel like, oh, I have to go get it right now. But if you want to, there certainly are copies available, probably about 3 of them, all used, of course. But I found this from a recommendation in the beginning of Magical Tawas by John Mumford, and he mentioned a book called Awakening the Life Force, so I bought it right away, and come to find that it's an out of print book that's not available. Um, it's not as readily available as some of these others. I overfilled this thing to the brim. Almost done. Almost done. So that's going to be the primary source that I'm reading from, Awakening the Life Force. But if you really want to know about these Vrittis and the definition of them, you do very well to research other sources within yoga, because this is a Sanskrit word. And like I mentioned, it means mental modifications. So, without further ado, we shall get started. Let's see how we can do this thing here. How's that? I don't think that works. Let's flip it around. One more time. I'm adjusting this tripod and then I'm good to go. Greetings, greetings, useless familiar. Peace, bro, peace. once I get this contraption working, it is over for you. All right, that should be good. I'll just tighten it here and angle it there. All right, that should work. Perfect. Okay, so let us begin. So this is chapter 13, and it's called Modifications of Consciousness and Yoga. And this also, I found, ties into what we were talking about last time with the different levels of consciousness. So let's get started. Go ahead and like this video if you enjoy this type of content, because I do like doing the book reads and all that good stuff. And if you guys are into that, then by all means, let me know. Okay, so as we have observed in the preceding chapters, the macrocosmic essence of Brahman and the microcosmic essence of Atman are pure, undifferentiated spirit. And by the way, for those of you who might be new to this, you'll notice that Brahman is pretty much what we would consider as God, ultimate consciousness here. And Atman would pretty much be our local access point to that, our individual personal God within us, right? Your personal soul, basically. So Brahman and the microcosmic essence of the Atman are pure, undifferentiated spirit. Brahman is the source of the Atman, or free soul, which is known as Jivatma. Right? So the Atman is the free soul, which is known as Jivatma, when it is embodied within the microcosm. The embodied soul can, at best, only partially represent the original reality because it is essentially only the reflection of the Atman. A reflection of the sun can never equal in power and brilliance the sun itself. Likewise, the power and brilliance of a conditioned soul can never equal that of Brahman. All right, so that's good information in regards to the similarity and the difference between your individual soul and God itself, right? While it is the same thing, the difference would be like how the sun can never equal in power and brilliance to a reflection of the sun. Those two things are not equal. So, though the limiting power of Brahman's illusion, the bound soul, through the limiting power of Brahman's illusion, the bound soul succumbs to nescience. It then loses awareness of its oneness with Brahman and becomes entangled in the material trappings of Prakriti. If you don't know, Prakriti is the totality of the manifested reality that we live in. You could call her the Matrix, right? You could call her the womb of creation, right? Or everything that is that you can experience, right? Especially everything physical, emotional, mental, and all that good stuff. All right, so becomes entangled in the material trappings of Prakriti. Its encasement in 3 layers of the microcosm creates within it a desire to live and cling to its enveloping bodies. So also realize that this individual soul is wrapped around layers and layers of what's called enveloping bodies. And this is where you get your astral body, your mental body, physical body, etc. So the real soul is wrapped in these different layers, and this is what creates our experience. So on the outside, we all appear to be different. On the inside, we're literally the same one soul expressing itself in Prakriti. And in order to express itself within Prakriti, it does so through different layers and layers and layers of modifications, right? So let's keep going. Then, because of the ego principle and lack of discriminative knowledge, it takes the unreal to be real. So, because of the ego, right? The ego, which is attachment, and a lack of discriminative knowledge, which 85% of the world lacks discriminative knowledge, it takes the unreal things and it considers them to be real. And you can easily see that just communicating with anybody who's anybody. Thus, due to its conditioned consciousness, an embodied soul helplessly comes into being again and again. Thus, due to its conditioned consciousness, an embodied soul helplessly comes into being again and again. Terrible. Trapped within the cycle of births and deaths. Brahman, being pure consciousness, is not affected by Prakriti. Remember, I said Prakriti is the manifest dimension. Brahman, being pure consciousness, is not affected by Prakriti. Brahman is the original source and substratum of all phenomena. Again, Brahman is the original source and substratum of all phenomena and cannot be touched by phenomena in any way. It remains only a passive witness to creation. The embodied soul, on the other hand, due to its limited consciousness, becomes involved with temporal existence, which we call samsara, and is entangled in the resultant consequences. Greetings, Filu. Greetings, Chaya Bat Sfi. Salute. Okay, so the embodied soul and psycho-mental consciousness. Like Brahman, the individual Atman is also transcendent and without characteristics. In its pure form, like Brahman, the Atman is also an inactive spectator or witness. But when it succumbs to the limitations of psycho-mental consciousness due to its three material coverings, it falsely assumes the role of a doer, right? Again, when it succumbs to the limitation of psycho-mental consciousness due to its three material coverings, your soul, right, falsely assumes the role of doer and an enjoyer. This reduction of the pure consciousness of the Atman to its conditioned consciousness as an embodied soul leads it to forget its true nature. Levels of human consciousness. As we now know, human consciousness can exist on four distinct levels. This spectrum of consciousness extends from the unlimited Atman Brahman state down through the causal and subtle states, and to the relatively extreme limitations of the waking state on the physical plane. Extreme limitations of the waking state on the physical plane. Almost everyone is limited during their waking hours to this physical state of consciousness, which is sufficient to enable one to maintain survival and attain various material goals. However, for attaining knowledge of metaphysical truths and experiencing the true nature of reality, one must transcend the boundary of normal consciousness and rise to the higher planes of consciousness. In order to realize our inner self, we need to abolish all intermediate states of consciousness and become established in the final and highest state of superconsciousness. This objective can be achieved by means of the contemplative techniques that are a part of yoga. Keeping this basic principle in view, sage Patanjali, which, comes from this right here. Keeping the basic principle in view, sage Patanjali has defined yoga briefly but succinctly in three Sanskrit words: chitta, vritti, nirodha. There it goes again. We mentioned this last time. Which literally means, and this is the meaning of yoga, we found this in the Tree of Life book by Israel Regardie. He mentions it. Niranjan Ananda mentions it in one of these books I've got in the stack. I think even Crawley mentioned this, but this is probably the most important verse in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, which is just verse number 2, chitta, vritti, nirodha, which literally means yoga is the cessation of the modifications of consciousness. Yoga is the cessation, which is the stopping of the modifications of consciousness. That's very important. That's why I'm talking about Vrittis, and that's why this is the first book that we're going over is the passive pravritti and nivritti, because it's crucial to understand the point of yoga is the cessation of the modifications of consciousness. This is why we seek to control the mind, Because if we don't control the mind, it's going to continue creating modifications. That's going to continue proliferating confusion. Thus, yoga is the process of returning limited consciousness to its pure, undiluted state at the level of Atman Brahman by inhibiting or removing the modifications, vrittis, inherent in the three lower states of consciousness. When the limitations inherent in the physical, subtle, and causal levels of consciousness are successfully transcended, consciousness returns to its original, unmodified state. The classical Indian sages, out of their own experience, have prescribed various yogic techniques for achieving this end. Each of the three words used by Patanjali in the above-mentioned definition of yoga has great meaning. In order to grasp the definition of yoga clearly, we must first understand these terms and their relation to one another in greater detail. So, let's start here. What is chitta? Because remember, it's a 3-word verse. And I'll turn to it here. 3. Yeah, there's like a whole, I should probably read this too. But if you just look right here, verse number 2, yoga, chitta, vritti, nirodha, right? Yoga, and then chitta. Chitta is the mind stuff, or the mind field. Vritti is defined as modifications. Nirodha is restraint. It's always good to have a book. If it's foreign translated to English, you always want to get it to where it translates it word by word and then gives, you know what I'm saying, the interpretation. But anyways, that translates to the restraints of the modifications of the mind stuff is yoga. Yoga is the restraint of the modifications of the mind stuff. We'll probably go over this as well if you guys want to. But yeah. Greetings, Julie. Greetings, Ben Gosling. So let's start with chitta. Chitta is the first word and the first part of this. So, we have already observed that consciousness, chit, is one of the triple aspects of ultimate reality, Sat Chidananda Brahman. Chit means pure consciousness or absolute awareness. This aspect of Brahman is known as Chidatma or Paramatma. When this aspect is reflected in universal nescience, which is Samashtiya Vidya, it is known as God, Ishvara. When reflected in individual nescience, it is known as the individual soul, Jivatma. Thus, both God and the individual soul are reflections of pure consciousness, Chidabhasa. The difference between the two is that God is the creator, dissolver, and maintainer of Prakriti, which is creation, right? And thus is not bound by its effects, while the embodied soul is subject to all the limitations and modifications inherent in phenomenal creation. God controls not only creation and its manifestations, but also each individual soul. He regulates the lives of all sentient beings by rewarding them for good deeds or punishing them for evil deeds. God, as the first reflection of pure consciousness, Adhyasa, is without a beginning or an end. Hence, God is beginningless, Anadi, and endless, Ananta. All subsequent reflections have a beginning and an end. Hence, all the forms of phenomenal creation are transient in nature. The reflection of pure consciousness is an individual being. The reflection of pure consciousness in an individual being is known as chitta consciousness. This is an originally unlimited Atman, or free soul, covered or obscured by the veil of nescience. It is a limited individual unit of intrinsically pure consciousness functioning within the realm of manifested nature. As we know from our reading in earlier chapters, once a free soul is limited by nescience, all the other limiting dynamics of creation automatically manifest, trapping an earthbound soul at the waking or physical level of consciousness, until such a time as that soul resorts to the consciousness elevating techniques of yoga. Yummy, yummy. Hunabku, greetings. Purple Phoenix, peace, peace. All right, let's go to the next part. The next part is difference between consciousness and mind. All right, so we just talked about consciousness, which is chitta. The difference between consciousness and mind. Because there is no word in English language that corresponds to chitta, it is often translated as mind. While the mind is limited to the cognition of thoughts, sensations, and images, chitta consciousness has a much more comprehensive field of operation. All right, so again, there's a distinction. Us English-speaking people, the closest thing we have to translate chitta is mind, right? But our understanding of the word mind really refers to the limited state of cognition of thoughts, sensations, and images. So when we think of mind, we think of becoming aware of our thoughts, different sensations, and different images. But chitta is actually much more comprehensive and much more expanded than just that. Chitta consciousness includes the thinking manas mind as well. And the thinking manas mind, that's the body mind, right? That's the mind of the body itself. Now, there's a distinction between what we just talked about, the sensations and images and thoughts. That's one mind. There's also a manas mind, which is the body sensations, basically, as well as a host of other functions. Chitta consciousness not only thinks, but desires, feels, senses, remembers, and intuits. Chitta consciousness is thus inclusive of the mind, but the opposite is not true. So chitta consciousness includes the mind, but the mind does not just include chitta consciousness. Therefore, chitta is more suitably translated as consciousness, as we have done in using the terms together in this text. Greetings, Jiren. So, let's see. The mind is a purely material medium of expression. It is the product of the finer and subtler matter of prakriti, creation. So there's that word again, prakriti, if you're not familiar with it. So I don't want to just say that prakriti is the totality of the material plane, because it also represents literally everything that can be experienced. So the hard, dense physical world is prakriti, but also the subtle world is prakriti. And when I say subtle world, I mean also thoughts and feelings and emotions. These are all considered matter as well, just very light matter, right? So the mind is a purely material medium of expression. It is the product of the finer and subtler matter of prakriti. Chaya Batsvi, what tradition is this? To be specific, the tradition is called Samkhya, Samkhya. Da, 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 da. So, chitta consciousness, on the other hand, is pure spirit, limited by its reflection by and entanglement in the finest matter of prakriti in the form of nescience. Therefore, it is neither pure consciousness nor pure matter. It is a curious combination of the living consciousness of the soul and the lifeless matter of creation. Although basically living consciousness, it is affected and defiled by lifeless matter. So check that out again, where there's a distinction here between living consciousness of the soul, right? We talked about the Brahman and the Atman, the Jivatman. That's the living consciousness of the soul. And then the lifeless matter of creation, that's Prakriti, that's matter. Matter including everything physical and everything subtle that can be made aware of. So all that is lifeless. It's animated by consciousness. Keep that in mind. So, Wyatt Coverdale, absolutely. Um, yes, and it will happen. Just been a bit occupied on this side. The thing should be clearing up here very soon. The mind is the medium of cognitive perception, while chitta consciousness is the medium of perceptions that take place on higher planes beyond the realm of thought, logic, and sensation. Chitta consciousness is capable of direct or trans-intellectual cognition, which, when filtered down to the level of physical consciousness, is usually called intuition, right? Let me read that sentence again because that was kind of cool. Chitta consciousness is capable of direct or trans-intellectual cognition, which, when filtered down to the level of physical consciousness, is usually called intuition. Because our awareness is so heavily centered around the functioning of our ego-directed logical minds, we are unable to clearly perceive or differentiate the functions of chitta consciousness and buddhi intellect. Now, buddhi intellect, that's going to be something that is categorized as a higher vibration of consciousness. It's a whole lot closer to source than chitta consciousness is, all right? So we are unable to clearly perceive or differentiate the functions of chitta consciousness and buddhi intellect, the other two components of our inner psychocognitive instruments. Preoccupied with the endless streams of words, ideas, and concepts that flow across the screens of our ego minds, we are by nature and preference unable to penetrate the inner resources of our psyches to experience, understand, and utilize our higher faculties of awareness. If you've been following along for the past couple of months, then you know that there's such a thing called antakarana, right? And that is the four compartments of the inner tool. Now, of the four aspect inner tool, we've got chitta, which is what we're talking about here. We've got manas, which is the body mind. We've got the ego, which is also known as ahamkara. And then we've got the buddhi, which is the highest self, right? Those four work together to create each individual person. Now, they also work in percentages. Most people obviously don't have that higher self, don't have full access, and is being utilized in most people. Most people are utilizing that lowest self, which is strictly body consciousness and chitta, and totally wrapped in the ego aspect, the ego mind. So this inability to go within and explore the inner dynamics of consciousness perhaps explains the still highly undeveloped state of the science of psychology in comparison to other modern sciences. Wyatt Coverdale, it's spelled Buddhi. All right, so functioning of consciousness. Chitta consciousness by itself is quite pure and luminous, but it becomes dull and impure due to defilement by matter, which limits it to the functional level of psychomental consciousness. A limited individual consciousness functions on the physical plane and becomes further defiled through prolonged identification with the internal and external faculties or vehicles of the human organism. Let me read that again. A limited individual consciousness functions on the physical plane and becomes further defiled through prolonged identification with the internal and external faculties or vehicles of the human organism. So it's through prolonged identification with, the internal and external vehicles of the human organism. So through prolonged identification with the physical body, etheric body, astral body, mental body, through prolonged identification with that, our individual soul, our individual consciousness, it becomes further defiled because it believes it's this vehicle, and in believing that it's vehicle, it kind of gets stuck here repeatedly. Let's continue. An individual takes recourse in these instruments so that his or her senses and faculties of action, under the executive control of the ego mind, may provide the data needed to develop understanding and mastery of the phenomenal world. So it does serve a purpose, right? Since we're here, since we're experiencing our life in this material plane, we do use the body and the vehicles to master this world. But again, it's through prolonged identification with this thing that starts to cause the problem. On the physical plane, an individual microcosm cognizes through the working of the inner instrument of cognition, antakarana. That's what I just mentioned a bit earlier, right? So on the physical plane, an individual microcosm cognizes through the working of the inner instrument of cognition, antakarana, consisting of consciousness, intellect, ego, and mind. When an individual identifies with his body or her emotions, it is the ahankara, ego, that functions. So that's an important line right there, so pay attention. When an individual identifies with his body or her emotions, it is the ahankara ego that functions. So that's ego. That's ego. That's ego. What is ego? Ego is when ego is when an individual identifies with his body or her emotions. Very important. When one ponders over the pros and cons of any subject, but still remains undetermined about its nature, it is the manas mind that functions. That happens to me like every day when I try to go get something to eat. When one ponders over the pros and the cons of any subject, but still remains undetermined about its nature, that's the manas mind that functions. All right, that's the body mind that I mentioned. That's funny. You ever sit in front of the fridge with two options and then like you can go over why the pizza would be delicious, but at the same time why the spaghetti might be a better choice? And that argument goes on for quite a while, and then ultimately no answer is decided. I hear that's air sign problems. Definitely not a Taurus issue. I hear Leos like to eat also. Anyway. When one determines or knows the nature of the subject object considered by the mind, it is the buddhi intellect that operates. Note the spelling, it's Buddhi, not Booty. So I'll read. So again, here we're talking about the four different minds of the antakarana, right? Again, when she talked about the buddhi mind or the highest mind, when one determines or knows the nature of the subject object considered by the mind, it is the buddhi intellect that operates. And again, I consider this one the highest self, your higher self of the antakarana. Notice how it says it knows the nature. When one tries to remember some information linked with any subject or object stored in the subconscious or conscious memory, one is said to function through the chitta consciousness. So you know what would be a good idea for you guys watching, especially those of you who've never heard this stuff before? I'd recommend getting something to write with, especially if you're going to be dealing with my channel for these next couple of months. You're going to want to know these terms. So let's write these down. The first one is antakarana. That's anta, Antahkarana. Antakarana, right? And that means inner instrument. Some of you guys should know this. If you already know about this in the chat, let me know. But if you don't know about this, be a smart student of the occult and write this word down. All right, so the Antakarana, because this isn't going anywhere. This isn't something that I'm just going to mention one time and you never see it again. I'm going to be talking about this all year, and it very much does relate to this thing, which we are definitely going to get into. That's the goal for 2022, at least for me, to fully understand this tree of life. And if you are riding along on this rocket ship, you're going to want to know the pieces. So Antakarana is the inner instrument, and it consists of 4 parts. All right, so it consists of the buddhi. All right, it consists of ahamkara. Right, ahamkara is also known as ego. It consists of chitta, which is what we're talking about in this particular chapter, and it consists of manas. All right, write that down, commit it to memory, keep it in mind, because we're going to be fleshing it out just as we go. And see, look, it's no longer good enough to just say my conscious mind, my subconscious mind, because you actually have more parts than just that. Conscious mind, subconscious mind, that's elementary. All right, you want to get a bit more detailed, because it's going to be difficult to work with these tools if you're not aware of these tools. It's more than just conscious mind, subconscious mind. We're dealing with the 4-part machine here. It's called the inner tool. It's a tool. So in order to become very good at using a tool, you got to know about the tool. So just what it said here, I'm going to go over these 4 parts. So when just talking about what's operating, here's what she says here, or what this author says here. On the physical plane, an individual microcosm cognizes through the working of the inner instrument, which is known as the Antakarana, consisting of consciousness, intellect, ego, and mind. All right, so what it says here, where the first one is ego that he talked about. When an individual identifies with his body or her emotions, it is the ahamkara ego that functions. So ahamkara ego is identification and attachment. It's attaching to body, attaching to emotion. That's what's functioning when you're going through that experience. All right. When one considers the pros, when one ponders over the pros and the cons of any subject, but still remains undetermined about its nature, it's the manas mind that functions. So the body mind, the autopilot, it can consider the pros and cons. It can do that, but it still doesn't gain any knowledge from about its nature, right? So we've got attachment. We've got the ability to ponder over different options, but still no new knowledge is produced. Next, we have my favorite part, which is called buddhi. When one determines or knows the nature of a subject or an object considered by the mind, it is the buddhi that operates. So check this out. Manas can ask about it. Manas can play with the details all day long. Manas can read the books about it, right? Manas can have the argument and the debate. Manas can do all that, but no knowledge is produced about the nature of the subject or the object. Where that comes from, the knowing comes from buddhi, the higher self, right? And what else did he say over here in another chapter? He's in another piece. He said, chitta consciousness is capable of direct or trans-intellectual cognition, which when filtered down to the level of physical consciousness is usually called intuition. That knowing aspect comes from buddhi, doesn't come from studying the books, right? That does give you information that is very useful, don't get me wrong, but knowing comes from buddhi, all right? And then the last part that it mentions, when one tries to remember some information linked with any subject or object, stored in the subconscious or conscious memory, one is said to be functioning through the chitta consciousness. All right. So that kind of serves to just illustrate a bit about these four aspects of the Antakarana. You'll find that all over these yoga books. One good place, and probably the first place that I really heard about this, was here in Tawashuti. And let's see. Yeah, she does have a whole chapter, chapter 7, which was very good. But before we get to chapter 7, which is on page 48, we're going to look on page 45, where it has the infamous chart. Right. And on the infamous chart, the evolution of the individual elements, what we have is an explanation of, or just a diagram of the macrocosm and the microcosm, right? And we're just going to focus on the microcosm for now, right? Because it filters down as pure consciousness and pure energy. It filters down and it's blinded by, well, from the combination of pure consciousness and energy, we get force, willing force, activated force, knowing force, right? To will, to dare, to know, and to be silent. That may sound familiar. And then that is veiled from Maya. So even though we are infinite God with all the will, all the activity, and all the knowing, that's veiled by the illusion. And with that illusion, all of these aspects of ourselves are hidden, right? Now, the Maya, as it hides our power, it hides us with 5 kanchukas, right? With 5 different sheaths, 5 envelopes. One of them, Kala, it limits the Kriya Shakti. It limits the power to do everything. It limits omnipotence. Vidya, it limits the knowledge, so it limits omniscience, the power to know all. Maya also limits, it gives us raga, which limits us through creating desire and attachment, right? And it makes us unhappy because we keep wanting shit. It also limits us by kala, which limits perpetual existence, and it gives us the notion of time. We believe that we are in time. And because we believe that we're in time, we grow old, we die, and we're reborn. All of these factors add to why we continually become reincarnated. And then the 5th aspect that Maya gives us, it limits our free will, honestly. And it gives us the notion of fate and destiny, and again, binds us to the cycle of birth and death endlessly. So yes, you are God. Yeah, you are infinite. However, don't forget that there are laws in place that you've agreed to. And one of those laws is Maya. And Maya has taken all your power and told you that it doesn't exist, or that it exists elsewhere, right? Now, it's not just enough for me to tell you that, because that's still you just receiving it under manas. You can hear me say it all day. You can hear every YouTuber in the world tell you how awesome you are. But if you don't make contact with Buddhi, the higher self, you're not going to have an experience, right? You're not going to believe it because you don't know it's true. You're going to hear about it, right? You'll be able to read about it and add it to your subconscious mind, etc., etc. You can even attach to how it makes you feel, and you can attach to how it makes you dress, right? But unless you get that experience of the higher self, unless you get to that point, it's not really going to do anything for you. Hence why it takes so much training in the spirit, so much training in this science to prove it to yourself, right? So let's get down to the microcosm, right? The microcosm, which is our individual experience, right? Your individual reality here. Purusha represents your soul, right? And on the other side, because remember, on this side, we've got pure consciousness, Shiva, that's consciousness. On this side, we've got Shakti, energy, matter. Prakriti, I mentioned earlier, and maybe you already know, Prakriti is the creatrix, matrix. Prakriti is the totality of everything that can be experienced, right? Now, what is evolved out of her is Antakarana, Buddhi, Ahamkara, Chitta, Manas. Buddhi, Ahamkara, Chitta, Manas, right? This is the machine. This is the tool that we use to experience her, right? Now, out of the Buddhi, out of this Antakarana comes the five elements, five tattvas: Akasha, Vayu, which is air; Agni, which is fire; Apas is water; Prithvi is earth. Five tamatras, the 10 indriyas. These are your five senses, your five organs that receive, your five organs of knowledge, your five organs of activity, um, your whole experience, right? If your physical experience was like a television and an Xbox and a game or a PlayStation, like that's all the stuff right here. And this is the player, right? And most people are continually making their way downward. We're trying to make our way back upward and go back through this illusionary force, which gives us limitation. Let me know in the chat if this does not make any sense to you whatsoever. Oh yeah, there was a chapter about Antakarana. I wanted to browse through that just real quick. Oh yeah, so also what she has to say about the Antakarana, the inner tool. She says Buddhi, also known as Mahat. For those of you who keep spelling it Booty, it's also known as Mahat. It is the highest intelligence which manifests its full potential under the influence of the Sattva guna, balance, harmony. Ahamkara, right? Ahamkara, the principle of individuality or ego, which emphasizes the existence of the self. Manas, or the mind or mental faculty of thought and counter thought, thought and counter thought. Remember, he talked about pondering the pros and the cons of a thing? That's thought and counter thought. Chitta, the collection of past impressions or samskaras. And that's what we're reading about now. The collection of data that you have accumulated over the years of your life. It is at this point that matter begins to dominate spirit, giving rise to the multiplicity of creation. Ahamkara gives rise to the gross elements, the indriyas, the tanmatras, which are the subtle essences, and tattvas, which comprise the physical body, the gross tattvas, which are grouped into numbers of 5. Yeah. So yeah, if you do have Tattva Shuddhi, which you should, I mean, if you've been watching my channel for a long time, you know I've mentioned this over and over and over and over again. You should have this book. Um, I have constantly read it over and over again, different parts of it, because this information is really high class information. So it will take multiple reads to really pull out the gems. Go back over chapter 7 and take some time to study the Antakarana, the individual mind, because Karana means tool or instrument. Anta means inner tool, inner instrument. If you're going to be a master at what you're doing, you want to know your tool. You want to study your equipment, right? You want to master the equipment, understand it through and through, so that you'll be able to really use this thing. If you've got Tattva Shuddhi, go back over chapter 7. It's not long, and it's not that complex, but it's very straight to the point. And look, she's got full paragraphs on each aspect. Buddhi, right, is said to be the faculty closest to pure consciousness, right? It's at a higher level. It reflects itself through intuition and dispassion, vairagya, non-attachment, right? The characteristics of the sattvic buddhi are wisdom, dispassion, reasoning, endurance, serenity, self-control, discrimination, and contemplation. You want to open access to this part of yourself, and you want this to become your primary personality, right? You want to move away from the ahamkara, which is your ego, as being your dominant aspect. You need all these parts to function in reality, but you have the choice of which one of these 4 pilots are driving the spaceship here. All right. And if Manas and Chitta are driving your ship, you're probably still at a lower evolutionary state. and that's okay because everyone has to start from somewhere. But if you're at the point where you're watching this channel, receiving this information, reading these books, etc., you're probably ready to graduate from just this point. All this is just information that you can use, or at least get you started on the path of figuring some of this stuff out. Oh, my phone is not popping up when I get a message. How about that? I'm just reading the chats here. Mm-hmm. What's good, Stray Panther? Peace, brother. Peace, peace. Kite Mama says I still fuck with Tot Shooty. Same here. I don't even put that book hasn't been on my bookshelf in a very long time, and I don't think it's gonna go back because I'm always opening it up. Connor Black, greetings, my brother. Tot Shooty is no joke indeed. Okay, so yeah, like I said, if you are unfamiliar with these terms, then please write them down, look them up, and if you do have taught with Shooty, go back over chapter 7 because, like I said, she goes into detail over those. And Swami Satya Sangananda is a very, very great teacher. If you're lucky, she might be able to teach you beyond the book. So, where were we? Did you guys hear a doorbell? Oh, I didn't order anything, so I'm not gonna go check it. Um, let's see. When an individual interacts with the external environment, the inner instrument, antakarana, operates with the aid of the external instrument, bahya karana, consisting of the senses of perception and faculties of action. And that was the other part of the chart that I didn't even go into. Page 45, the infamous chart. So the antakarana, the inner tool, is going to be this aspect. The bahya karana, which is the external tool, which is your body, it's this part here. So it consists of the senses of perception and faculties of action. In this manner, when the inner and the outer instruments function jointly under the guidance of ego mind, information in the form of sense objects can be ingested and assimilated to construct a comprehensive picture of the external environment. This is how an individual consciousness obeys the inner urgings of its inbuilt evolutionary drive to gain knowledge and experience of the realm of the conditioned existence, samsara. Because chitta consciousness functions in close collaboration with mind and intellect, it is customary to identify it with manas mind. However, in order to make some distinction between the two, chitta consciousness is often called mind stuff instead of merely mind. But it does not take much practical difference, does not make much practical difference because when the mind stuff becomes active and undergoes transformation or modification, it virtually assumes the form of mind. So when the mind stuff becomes active and undergoes transformation or modification, that's what we're talking about, it virtually assumes the form of mind. Thus, to all intents and purposes, chitta consciousness acquires the property of mind. Hence, in yogic literature, the terms chitta consciousness and manas mind are often used synonymously. And you'll even see that underlying notion. I just noticed it as I had taught with Shruti open here. See how she's got a section here, one for Buddhi, one for Ahamkara, but when it comes to Manas and Chitta, they share one together. So they're very close. They're different, but they're very close. Just something to keep in mind for those of you who are going to study that. Alora says, so Chitta often probably gets confused as the subconscious mind, when really the subconscious mind is still the mind because it's limited to sensation, etc. Interesting. So let's continue shining some light on this inner tool of ours. Where was I? Yeah, mind stuff. Yeah, so it's very close. Yeah, they're used synonymously. So, in the context of yoga, chitta consciousness is best described as the contemplative mind, as distinguished from manas mind, which is simply the perceptive, logical mind. Because remember, manas deals with thought and counter thought, right? So, again, chitta consciousness is best described as the contemplative mind, as distinguished from manas, which is essentially the perceptive, logical mind. All right. So just like what he set up above a little bit higher, when one tries to remember some information linked with any subject or object stored in the subconscious or conscious memory, one is said to be functioning through chitta consciousness. I said, Aja, I'm present, but it's not making sense to me just yet. Okay, that's all right. Like I said, this isn't like something that here and gone. This is definitely what we're going to be fleshing out here over the next couple of months. You have the book Taught with Shruti. Definitely go over chapter 7. Definitely go over chapter 7, because like I mentioned, that's where Sister Satya Sangananda goes over the details of these different aspects of the inner tool. And I found it very helpful because I was one of those people, just like everybody else, that's like, oh, conscious mind, subconscious mind, and that's it. While that's a good categorization system, I found that it works so much better when you acknowledge it with at least 4 different working parts, because then it just makes things a bit easier to keep track of what's going on with yourself, you know. Virez Beats says, will this be a video we can go back over? At first that was going to be a no, because I wasn't going to give the title of this book, but since I already did, I don't know, we'll see, maybe. If anything, I guess I'll just put it on the members part. Not even because this information is just like hush hush. I just don't want the price to go up to $1 million as usual. But anyways, let's continue. All right. So in the context of yoga, chitta consciousness is best described as the contemplative mind, as distinguished from manas mind, which is essentially the perceptive, logical mind. When Patanjali defines yoga as the complete cessation of all the modifications of chitta consciousness, again, that's that second verse of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, which I've seen referenced in so many books just over the past month alone, which is definitely a sign. He's referring to the contemplative mind rather than the perceptive mind. So he's referring to chitta as opposed to manas. This is because the realm of the thinking mind is transcended upon completion of the very first primary stage of yoga practice, which is sadhana. Thus, when a yogi who has begun the second stage of yoga practice returns from the daily entry into super consciousness, samadhi, to the waking state of consciousness, the thinking mind still exists, but no longer has any real relevance to his or her practice of yoga. How many times have you guys gone into deep meditation, and really, you know, really hit the point of meditation and then come back and your mind is still there? Your mind is still there. That's kind of funny to me. Like you'll sit there. No, it doesn't matter how long. You can be there for hours, 30 minutes, 8 minutes, as long as you hit that spot and then you come back and the mind is trying to take over as quickly as it can. What's to eat? Where we going? What we doing? Did you see what she was wearing? Instantly. I think that's kind of funny. The perceptive logical mind can, at most, help one to obtain word-based indirect knowledge of spirit. Again, the perceptive logical mind can, at most, help one to obtain word-based indirect knowledge of the spirit. But the basic ignorance of the nature of the real self is not destroyed by such knowledge. On the other hand, knowledge obtained by direct contact with the contemplative mind or chitta consciousness destroys the hindrances that prevent one from realizing one's true nature as spirit. This is why chitta consciousness, the contemplative mind, has a central role in yoga. Cabell Ambassador says, "This is helpful. Thanks. I have taught with Shooty, so the more we go back through it, the better." Awesome. Yeah, I'm glad you have that book. Again, like I said, go over chapter 7 because it's very useful. Very useful. Hunab Ku says, "The link to the membership is in the description, correct? I was looking for the join button." It might be. I think I took that out of the description for this particular one. If you just look right next to the subscribe button, you'll see the join button. Virez Beat says, "So would these be considered the monkey mind? The monkey mind that we talk about? Yeah, you could say that that's going to be a functioning of chitta and manas. Um, the monkey mind is a state, though. I wouldn't say that there's a part of ourselves that we could call that monkey mind because that same part can be trained to behave. But what we're calling the monkey mind, that's an out of control chitta, out of control manas. And it's very difficult to sit it down. But the reason I hesitate to saying that it would be called that this is the monkey mind is because it can be trained to behave. It can be trained. Not completely mastered 100%, but it can be trained. And the more that you do train it, the more that you modify it, the less that it becomes a problem. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, I would say that's what we're referring to, the chitta mind and the manas mind, just out of control. Yeah, and that's another good point, Alora. Thank you. Just like the previous book, it's a state, and the higher that you go in disciplining the self, and disciplining the self, that part of it can include sitting down for meditation, but it's not the meditation itself. It's going within and reaching these higher states. And the more that you reach the higher states, the more that you stay in a higher state, the more that you exist there consciously, it begins to modify the quote unquote lower aspects of self. It begins to naturally have a disciplining effect on the lower self, because you got to understand and remember, most people don't reach the higher levels. So, of course, they're not going to behave in such a way as if they've experienced the light. One, if you know better, you do better. If you've never known better, how can you do better, right? Monkey mind sounds like mad female mind. Sorry. Says J Bones R, not me. And it just hit me that I did not put any creamer whatsoever in my coffee. Where was I? Okay, yeah, so we finished that page. We're talking about the similarities of chitta and manas, the similarities of body mind, and the aspect of logic mind. Again, if you joined us late, you want these terms written down and you want to go study them, or at least get a good definition of what they mean. If you're going to be on my channel, if you're going to be dealing with the chat or these books, you're going to want to have at least an understanding, a general understanding of these terms, right? The antakarana is the inner tool. This inner tool is composed of four aspects. These are what make your mind. These are what make your inner experience. You've got an outer tool and an inner tool. You already know about the outer tool. You got a mirror. But this inner tool is going to take a little bit more research. Before, the only two phrases we had were conscious mind and subconscious mind. The ancients, who lived way before any of this stuff was even invented, understood that there were at least four aspects. Buddhi, which is the higher self, higher intellect. Ahamkara, which is the ego. Chitta, which is the functioning of the conscious mind. And then manas, which is the thought, counter thought, back and forth of the body mind. You know. So let's continue. All right. So almost to the chitta part. Hey Veronica. Greetings. Hikate. Where we at? The mind is a purely material medium of expression. It is the product of the finer and... That sounds familiar. Yep. All right. So, how modifications occur, how vrittis occur. All right. So let's check this out. Vrittis are important to understand. So that's why we're talking about this. That's why we did this video, because I saw this part right here. And also because I saw levels of human consciousness. And we just so happened to do a video about that. All right, let's continue. In its state of bondage, limited consciousness identifies itself with the various modifications or transformations it undergoes due to its involvement with the external environment. Greetings, Christy. Let's say that again. In its state of bondage, limited consciousness identifies itself with the various modifications or transformations it undergoes due to its involvement with the external environment. So that kind of sounds familiar to what it was saying earlier about how the soul becomes, what was the word it used? I don't want to say corrupted, but they're defiled. A limited individual consciousness functions on the physical plane and becomes further defiled through prolonged identification with the internal and external vehicles, the human organism. So what it says here is, in the state of bondage, limited consciousness identifies itself with the various modifications or transformations it undergoes. It identifies itself, ego, right? Limited consciousness, your private soul, personal soul, identifies itself with the various modifications or transformations it undergoes, the changes. Why do the changes occur? Due to the involvement with the external environment. So by your soul being in this body, interacting with this world, that causes your consciousness to identify itself with this body, causing defilement. That's what the sin is. That's what the impurity is. So when we talk about taught with Shuddhi and we talk about the subtext of the tantric practice of inner purification, you're not being purified from smoking Marlboro cigarettes. You're not being purified from eating pork and chitlins on Thanksgiving and New Year's and Christmas. You're not being purified from having sex thoughts. You're not being purified from stealing something, from scamming somebody, from, all the other stuff that people do. That's not the purification it's talking about. When it talk, I like that. Kite Mama says, hence the gross body. Gross body. Hanifa, greetings, greetings. When it talks about purification, we're purifying the fact that the soul is identifying itself with the transformations and modifications that spring up due to involving with this world. Now, if you guys were around when I was reading the book Mimetic Magic, that those modifications and transformations are happening every single time you come into contact with culture. So every time you crack open that phone and get on social media, you're going through these transformations and modifications. Back in the day, it was simply by you going outside and interacting with people and learning about the newest gossip and watching the news. Now it's every single time you open up this phone, your soul is being modified. Every single time. And I'm not talking about some conspiracy theory, oh, they're doing this to us with what's that word? With the metaverse. No. One more time. Limited consciousness identifies itself with the various modifications or transformations it undergoes due to its involvement with the external environment. Simply being involved with the external environment. Like, that's how deep it cuts. That's how deep it cuts. So it's not like you're going to save the world by deleting Facebook off your phone, right? It's not like you're going to save the world by putting plastics in the recycling bin. No, you're going to save the world by understanding how this inner tool works and understanding what non-attachment means. Let me know if that makes sense in the Chiz Act. Moldvox says we have to stop identifying with emotion or getting tied up in frustration and impatience and anger. Yes, sir. Alora says, like in the first chapter, the soul itself is on a transformational journey. So our modifications are on a gross, subtle level. Absolutely. Hanifa, thank you. Yeah, so I mean, this isn't like spicy demon stuff, but honestly, this is the answer that we're all into magic for in the first place, right? We're looking for something deeper. Well, here it is, right? Let's keep going. 777, I love it. All right, so God. So just a little recap as well from the very beginning. God, or the ultimate soul, is unconditioned consciousness, and that same unconditioned consciousness is within the self, right? Within the inner soul, your personal soul. But here's what it says about that: the embodied soul, that's your personal soul, it can at best only partially represent the original reality, because it is essentially only the reflection of Atman. A reflection of the sun can never equal in power and brilliance the sun itself. Likewise, the power and brilliance of a conditioned soul can never equal that of Brahman. All right. So yes, the soul within you is still the soul that's within God, but because it is shining through the experience of where we are, because it is shining through like that, it's only a reflection. So this is not your true self. You're experiencing a reflection of your true self. So don't get attached to this reflection, because it's only a reflection. Here's the thing: the more that you find yourself attached to the reflection, the harder it is to get out. So all this pain and suffering that you're feeling, it's still attachment. all the worries and the, well, I still got to do this and I can't leave unless, I make sure my kids are, all that stuff that keeps you up at night, that's what's keeping you on this planet at night as well. Let's continue. I keep getting stuck on that first sentence. It's a good sentence. Reflection asks, are you an advocate for veganism for metaphysical abilities? For myself, absolutely. Absolutely, 1000%. Mulvok says, are the gross tattvas a frequency? Yep. I don't know if you study music, but let me get a picture here. I don't know if you've ever seen square waves. I don't know if you've ever seen sine waves. I don't know if you've ever seen triangle waves, right? Yeah, absolutely. The gross tattvas are frequencies. But let's continue. In its state of bondage, limited consciousness identifies itself with the various modifications or transformations it undergoes due to its involvement with the external environment. In its original undifferentiated state as pure consciousness, chitta, there were no modifications or fluctuations because of its complete dissociation with and isolation from matter. In its original undifferentiated state as pure consciousness, there were no modifications or fluctuations because of its complete dissociation with and isolation from matter. So pure consciousness was pure because it had nothing to do with matter whatsoever. It had nothing to do with matter whatsoever. But because pure consciousness came into contact with matter, it began to become defiled. It began to become impure, right? What's the impurity? Not eating an apple in the garden, not being mean to somebody, not telling a lie, not cheating on them, none of that stuff. What it was is identification with that matter, believing in the changes that seem to occur from having contact with matter. That's the sin. That's the sin. That's the defilement. But veiled by that very first covering of nescience, consciousness became limited, subject to the effects of material phenomena. Really cool. Wyatt Coverdale says, I figured something out. Magical affirmations should never begin with I am, because I is an illusion. Instead, it should begin with your name is, because that separates the self from the mask. That's a good one. I would test it out, most definitely, and see what you get. I would also mix in there, since you're experimenting, I would mix in there, you are, instead of saying I or your name. Also try you are, talking to yourself in the third or second person. See how that works out for you. An analogy can be used here of a clear spring into which a pebble has been thrown. The pebble has caused ripples that now mar the spring's still surface. The pebble is nescience, which has turned the once still undifferentiated pure consciousness into the limited oscillating chitta consciousness. Ripples created by the pebble are the modifications of consciousness, vrittis. Interesting. So probably the best way to think about vrittis, right? Vrittis in the chitta, because remember chitta was the mind stuff, remember? Vrittis that happen in your chitta, think of the chitta, that the function of the mind stuff, because homie talked about monkey mind earlier, right? So here's what it is. With chitta, imagine chitta is that pond. Now the vritti is when you throw that rock in there, and that rock causes all these ripples in the pond. So now the pond is no longer still, but it's got these vibrations and ripples. That's the monkey mind behavior. Now, as long as you don't throw any more pebbles in there, that monkey mind behavior is going to stop and it's going to calm down. But what do? We continue throwing more and more pebbles, right? We go looking for more pebbles. Once nescience and the other four afflictions, or klishas, set in, they cause consciousness to identify self with the endless fluctuations of matter that occur at the gross, subtle, and causal levels of awareness. Mm, mm. All those ripples cause consciousness to identify itself with the ripples. And the ripples are only happening because consciousness has come into contact with matter. Once nescience and the other four klishas set in, they cause consciousness to identify itself with the endless fluctuations of matter that occur at the gross, subtle, and causal levels of awareness. These fluctuations of matter are then felt by consciousness through reflex action, causing it to oscillate in causing it to oscillate in direct proportion to the degree to which it has been affected by any given material phenomena. Causing it to oscillate in direct proportion to the degree to which it has been affected by any given material phenomena. These oscillations are the modifications, vrittis, of chitta consciousness. Just a clue, depending on how deeply you let something affect you is how deeply it's going to be ingrained into your consciousness, which means how much work you're going to have to do to unaffect it. If you catch my drift, talking about trauma, talking about PTSD, talking about depression, talking about all these different things, depending on how deeply you are affected and how deeply you attach to the affection is going to be how deep the infection. Rules of karma, says Alora. Draws of Tahuti. Hanifa Soul Afua says, is it using your name also an illusion as you see yourself as your name? Absolutely, which is why I suggested saying you and not the name. Draws of Tahuti. Let's continue. Oh, so ridiculous. Um, Although the modifications have their origin in the reactive fluctuations of chitta consciousness, they are, for the most part, generated by the functioning of the ego, mind, and intellect, the first three hierarchical derivatives of prakriti. And you saw that from the chart that I showed on page 45. You should get this book. It's a great book. Prakriti and how it evolves into buddhi, ahamkara, chitta, manas. In that order, by the way. And when you do the Tatwashuddhi meditation or any deep meditation, you're going to see this. You're gonna come up out of manas into chitta, into ahamkara, which is experienced as the om vibration of the third eye. And then above that, you're going to see buddhi. But yeah, notice how they're all coming up out of prakriti, sweet mama matrix. So what did it say again? It says, although the modifications have their origin in the reactive fluctuations of chitta consciousness, they are, for the most part, generated by the functioning of the ego, mind, and intellect, the first three hierarchical derivatives of prakriti. That's what I just showed you. The modifications generated at the ego, mind, intellect levels of ordinary human consciousness thus constitute the vast bulk of all modifications experienced by any individual. So, prakriti, buddhi, ahamkara, chitta, also known as the ego, mind, intellect levels. And what he said here is the modifications generated at the ego, mind, intellect level of ordinary human consciousness thus constitute the vast bulk of all modifications experienced by any individual. So a huge part of all the shit that you're going through has come from your ego attachment, from the ripples in your mind stuff, and how much or how little you allow your higher self to manage and deal with it. Very little of it is coming from manas, body, mind, autopilot. Your body's just doing its thing. It wants to eat, sleep, use the bathroom, you know, have sex, mate, feed, kill, repeat. That's all manas is really concerned with. And also debating with itself. Should I eat the pizza or the spaghetti, or should I just not eat at all? That's my Manas, at least. Richard Colbreth asks, how can I program my reality? Could someone please teach me? Absolutely. But do you have the patience to figure it out? If you do, you should join my book study group and pay attention to what is being book studied. Let's continue. But yeah, a less smartass answer is, in order, you're asking for, it's like saying, how do I start a business? Well, while that question can be answered, there's a lot of parts that need to be addressed first. So, in order to program your reality, you have to know what your reality is. You got to know what that even means. What are the parts of your reality? What are you? Can it even be programmed? All these questions need to be answered first. So, start at the beginning, my friend. Start at the beginning. Otherwise, you're going to stay frustrated. So, as we just learned, ego, mind, intellect levels of ordinary human consciousness constitute the vast bulk of all modifications experienced by an individual. Because the modifications have their source and root in chitta consciousness, that is where they must be controlled and eradicated. That's important. That's important. He said, because the modifications, because the ripples, right? And what do we know about modifications? It says up here at the top of this page, in this state of bondage, limited consciousness identifies itself with the various modifications. And where do the modifications come from? Their involvement with the external environment, right? You said, how can I program my reality? We got to understand that your reality is being programmed by the transformations and modifications that your consciousness has to undergo by being in contact with your external environment. You feel me? Uppity unicorn. Good evening. Because the modifications have their source and root in chitta consciousness, that is where they must be controlled and eradicated. See, if you didn't know that, you wouldn't know where to start. So in the Antakarana, in this 4-part tool of mind, this is where those ripples are. Because remember, Manas isn't really worried about too much. Manas is doing its thing. This is ruled by the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind takes care of Manas, nothing to worry about. Just keep taking your vitamins and eating your sea moss and getting some good rest and watching Travis Mage's videos. Manas takes care of itself. But it's at the chitta level, that's where we throw rocks and endure the ripples. And this is where that process has to be fixed, because ahamkara is just going to identify with the physical and emotional experiences, but it's chitta that causes those experiences. Let's continue. I'll read it again because it's worth hearing. Because the modifications have their source and root in chitta consciousness, that is where they must be controlled and eradicated. Due to the diffused and scattered nature of physical consciousness, the control of the modifications of the physical level is impossible. This is why yogis take recourse in the practice of yoga, which gradually enables them to enter the state of superconsciousness, samadhi, and thus transcend the lower levels of consciousness at which the ego, mind, etc. function to directly deal with chitta consciousness and the modifications that arise from it. Only by elevating awareness to the highest level at which chitta consciousness functions can a yogi be in a position to control or stop its modifications. This means that in order to re-experience pure consciousness, and keep in mind here it says re-experience, because this is already a part of your being. This isn't something that you have never felt or experienced before. You're just pretty distanced from it. This means that in order to re-experience pure consciousness, One must first stop all modifications of chitta consciousness. When all the fluctuations of consciousness are stilled, the vision of pure consciousness can be attained. Keeping this important principle in view, sage Patanjali aptly defines yoga as the total cessation of all modifications of chitta. Yoga Sutras 1, 2. This is another good book to have because this is kind of like the source book of yoga. And I continually keep seeing verse number 2 referenced over and over and over again. So verse 2 is, it must be pretty important around the world in this science of yoga. Yeah. Let's continue. Types of modifications of consciousness. As an individual is involved in the daily activities of life, chitta consciousness acts in concert with the mind, ego, and intellect to experience and record all the impressions received through the five cognition senses, the jnanendriyas. Because an individual identifies with these experiences, considering them to be real, they create corresponding modifications, vrittis, in the stream of consciousness. Notice it says, because an individual identifies with these experiences, considering them to be real. That's what creates modifications, vrittis. That's how vrittis occur. The modifications of consciousness called chitta vrittis are theoretically of infinite variety because of the innumerable ways sensory input can be perceived, biased, interpolated, etc., to create inner experience. Sage Patanjali, however, has classified all modifications into the 5 broad categories of right knowledge, wrong knowledge, imagination, sleep, and memory. Right knowledge can be derived through direct cognition, inference, or testimony. It may involve direct contact with an object, or it may not. And all this can be found in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, which again is the source book, it seems, of yoga. Wrong knowledge, viparyaya, is taking to be real what is unreal, or the misconception of an object. It is characterized by the distortions of perception produced by the 5 hindrances, the 5 kleshas. Both right knowledge and wrong knowledge are cognitive states resulting from the direct contact of consciousness with external objects through the sense organs, or by indirect contact with the same or similar objects through memories from which conclusions can be inferred. So he just added something else. It's not only just direct contact with external objects by the sense organs, but also the memories that you have of previous contact and the labels and meanings that you put on those things. Interesting. Imagination is the creation of fanciful mental impressions that are a mixture of reality and unreality. Sleep is the temporary suspension of the flow of consciousness. Both imagination and sleep are perceptive states caused by the withdrawal of consciousness from the physical senses. In both cases, there is a reduction of consciousness. Of course, more so in the case of sleep than in that of imagination. In a withdrawn or reduced state of consciousness, images are projected inwardly upon one's mental screen from memory without any direct contact with such objects in the outer world. The final category of modification is memory. A memory is the unembellished recollection of objects previously experienced. It is the combination of the impressions made by an object that, as it was perceived, and the experience that it produced within the mind at that time. Memories themselves can also be remembered, and the memories of memories, and so on. Check that out. Memories themselves can be remembered, and the memories of memories. So in my study of psychology, I keep seeing pop up that every time you access a memory, it changes it ever so slightly. So accessing a memory repeatedly over time starts to modify it. So you even start to distort and change your memories. Isn't that something? Isn't that something? So a lot of things that I mean, think about it. If you remember a good time that you had with somebody, you're going to keep highlighting the good parts, eventually erasing the bad parts, and it's just going to be this rosy colored fantasy that probably didn't even happen. Shai Sade, thank you very much. I like what Nuru says here. In essence, you stop modifying when you don't react. Equanimity, pause, non reaction is what purifies chitta. Return you to the unencumbered Atman, liberation. I like that. Naturally natured, peace, peace. Very cool, very cool. Um, So again, I want to read that again because I kind of stumbled a bit. The final category of modification is memory. A memory is the unembellished recollection of objects previously experienced. It is the combination of the impressions made by an object as it was perceived and the experience that it produced within the mind at that time. Memories themselves can also be remembered, and the memories of memories, and so on. Each of these five general types of modifications of consciousness may be either pleasurable or painful. All physical, mental, and emotional experiences create either a feeling of pleasure or pain. If the reaction to an experience is positive, chitta consciousness is attracted to it, and the modification that occurs is pleasurable. On the other hand, when the reaction to an experience is negative, chitta consciousness recoils from it, and the resulting modification is painful. So here we have that infamous function of running towards pleasure and running away from pain, right? So it looks like chitta is responsible for that. So there's a little diagram here dealing with sattva and rajas and tamas. I'm gonna put that there so that you can see it. Okay, let's continue. So, in addition to this five-fold classification of consciousness modifications, chitta vrittis, there is another way of classifying them. According to this second method, by the way, just to go back over that for anyone who was on it, dog on it. Good night, Wyatt Coverdale. Thanks for joining us. So, just to go back over that one more time, Sage Patanjali has classified all the modifications, all the different vrittis, into five broad categories. There's right knowledge, there's wrong knowledge, there's imagination, there's sleep, and there's memory. If you want more details on that, check out the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and there does go more detail into those five types of vrittis. Um, And it does say here on verse 12, these mental modifications are restrained by practice and non-attachment, just like what Nuru said up there a bit earlier. Yeah. Um, yeah. So yeah, this is all within like the very first part of the Yoga Sutras. So you'll definitely get more information on the different types of disturbances that modify the mind and impurify the soul because of its association with matter and the body. So this is good stuff to know because you can see what's going on. Before you can try to stop or change anything, you got to know what's going on, right? Everyone wants to control their reality and program their subconscious mind and all that stuff, but the same people have a very difficult time defining these terms or understanding what these terms mean. So it helps to start at the beginning. In addition to this five-fold classification of consciousness modifications, chitta vrittis, there is another way of classifying them. According to the second method, modifications of consciousness are of three general kinds, depending upon which of the three gunas, the three qualities of Prakriti, creation, is predominant when a modification is generated. Modifications are therefore either sattvic, illuminative, rajasic, passionate, or tamasic, delusive. This threefold classification of modifications, all this, yeah, this threefold classification of modifications of consciousness with the corresponding gunas is as shown below. See the color plate. Uh-oh. It suggests that I show you the color plate. And by the way, Prakriti, which is creation, which is the matrix, which is the womb of creation, the substance of her is the mixture of these three qualities. Sattva, which is awareness, Rajas, which is passion, Tamas, which is ignorance. But it's not just those three things. Those are three general descriptions in comparison to each other. Sattva can be seen as balance. Rajas can be seen as agitated, passionate energy, and Tamas is almost like decay and gravity and heaviness. It says see color plates, so let's go to the color plates real quick. Thank you, Moldbox. Let's see the color plates. Oh, there's the color plates. And what do the color plates have to do with Prakriti? Well, there's the different kleshas. Ooh, yeah, here's that complicated chart. Okay, so page 153 is where we were. But right now, let's just take a look at this right here. This is pretty much just like what I showed you in Taught with Shooty, but a bit more complex. Complex? Really? Why'd you have to go and make things so complex? So yeah, we're just gonna look at Prakriti right now. And so this is Prakriti, unmanifest Prakriti. And I always say, not because I made it up, but because I read it and experienced it in meditation. In this book, Samkhya Darshan, it talks about how there's actually three levels of existence. There is, God level, then there's the unmanifest, and then there's the manifest dimension. So I'm just going to that so I can show you what I saw. Here we go. Basically, on chapter 6 of Samkhya Darshan, Swami Niranjan Ananda Saraswati talks about how, according to the Samkhya system, there are 25 stages of evolution, into which are classified three categories as follows. The first category is consciousness, beyond the manifest and unmanifest. So, consciousness is the highest level. That is where the God level is, right? And guess what? It exists beyond the manifest and the unmanifest. And if you take a good look at this chart, well, honestly, it's not here, but there's a triple blackness above Kether, and it's beyond manifest and unmanifest. It's just out there. It's not even a part of the tree. It's beyond the tree. It's the background of this book. It's way out there. But the next level is the unmanifest. The unmanifest is a lot like the prototype dimension. You're not really going to change it because it is unmanifest. Bobby Hemmett probably spoke of this as Universe A, I believe. And then we find ourselves in Universe B. But basically what that's referring to is the subtle planes. The subtle planes, and like I said, it's a lot like the prototype dimension. One way that I always describe it is when you think about how all these people have an iPhone, but there is one prototype of the iPhone, and that doesn't change, right? It's a prototype. It doesn't matter how many apps you download on your iPhone. It doesn't matter if your iPhone gets flushed down the toilet or run over. None of that affects the prototype. The prototype remains as is. That's the unmanifest. And then, of course, the manifest dimension is your specific iPhone in your pocket with those specific apps on it and your history and all that other stuff. Okay. So I showed you that to show this here. This is Prakriti in its unmanifested state. And I just talked about Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. Sattva being the harmonious, balanced state, Rajas being the active and fiery nature, Tamas being the very gravity, heavy, earthy state of decay, right? That's Prakriti and the unmanifest. Um, that chart is just another way of looking at this chart, the infamous chart on page 45. You should be able to see this chart with your eyes closed. Gunas, which is what I asked you to write down a little bit earlier, because all these terms are in a different language and it's going to be hard for you to remember them if you don't see them every day like I do. But this is the inner tool, the antakarana, the mind, right? From body mind to thinking faculty and understanding faculty and ego, attachment, and higher self, right? All that is wrapped up and involved in this section here, the antakarana. But that is evolved out of Prakriti. Now notice here we've got Prakriti in her perfect state. This is her in the unmanifest state. She's not changed, she's balanced. Right under that is Mahat or Buddhi, intellect. Check it out. Buddhi, Mahat, intellect. What's going on here? Those three qualities that compose her, the harmony, the passion, and the decay, generator, operator, destroyer, right? Now it's all mixed up and kind of wavy. It's still in its potential format. It can be arranged, it can be redistributed and all that good stuff. That's what's going on here at this level, the higher self level. Now, right below that is ahamkara, which is ego level. Now, look what's happened to her ingredients. When we talk about ego and ahamkara, we're talking about attachment. Notice how the waves have been solidified, hardened, crystallized. Another word for it is calcified. Notice that big chunk of tamas right there, that big chunk of rajas, that big chunk of sattva. See, it's not free flowing anymore. It's solidified and it's contained. Now, this is what causes the illusion, the ego, right? This is what causes it. Because out of this crusty, hardened tamas, rajas, and sattva, we get everything else, right? We get the cognitive sense facilities, we get the five elements, we get sound, we get flavor, odor, taste, all that good stuff, and we get the five elements. All that comes from the fact that we've taken the unmanifest and we begin to calcify and crystallize it by clinging to it. We have an experience and we attach to it. Remember what this book said about the modifications of consciousness? How because of soul being in a body, it becomes tainted and defiled because of its contact with the physical plane, the material plane, and it attaches to those changes that are produced. It attaches to the modifications and transformations that the bodies undergo, right? That's what causes all this crusty calcification. It never really happened, but in perspective of the ego, it happened. Even at the buddhi level, notice how it's still free flowing. But yeah, that's a more colorful version of what's going on here. So there's the color plates that it wanted me to show you. Binya, polywog. Becoming more dense. Alora says ego works to affirm itself. Absolutely. All right, so let's go back to where we were because that's a pretty cool picture, I would say. Yeah. Integrated metaphysics of Samkhya, Yoga, and Vedanta. All right, let's keep it pushing. Keep it pushing. All right, I'm gonna ask you to do a few things. Go ahead and like this video if you haven't liked it already. If you like it, right? If you enjoy this kind of thing. I really like doing this. I think it's a lot of fun, and I could literally do it all night. I think I've proved that multiple times. But if you enjoy it, like the video to let me know that you enjoy it, and maybe we will do it more often. Also, I've got a book study group where it's not going to just be me talking. Hopefully, I invite you to join me as well every Sunday. And the first book that we're doing, this is actually tomorrow. We're going to do the first chapter of this book here, The Passive Poverty and Nivriti. And if your copy didn't come in already, or your copy got stolen out of the mailbox, I recorded the first chapter on audiobook, and that will be going private to groups soon, you know. But go ahead and get this book. This is the first one that we'll do. This is the whole reason why I'm doing this tonight, because notice the title, Passive Pravriti and Nivriti. And we're learning about how the vrittis are mental modifications. And once again, the vritti is the disturbance, the wave, the ripple. And the deeper the ripple, the more prone ego is to attach to it. And when it attaches to that change, it believes it's that change. And that's what makes the soul impure, defiled. That's what builds karma, right? Cause and effect. The cause is you attaching to that ripple. The effect is that you're going to get more ripples. You feel me? So, yeah, join me in studying this information, not because it sounds cool and it makes you look deep, which it does, and you'll also live a better life, a happier life, because you start to understand why you're doing the things you're doing and why you should change the behavior possibly. And if you're looking for, spiritual advancement, well, now you're beginning to see how it's done. This book says, and these other books, because this isn't just like one author talking about, like, this is all cross-referencing these different books by different, it's not even like all in the same associated group. This isn't even all yoga bihar stuff. This is different people, but the science is the same, and it's provable by experience. If you want to um, move forward with spiritual growth, you've got to first stop these ripples, which is why this is the first book I chosen in the book study. So don't wait. Go ahead and join by hitting the join button next to subscribe, and be a part of this movement that we've got going on here. Because even being associated with this helps. I mean, how many of you guys are just listening to the audiobooks and, like, you know, dare I say, maybe start understanding it more than if you were just reading it yourself? That's not an insult to you, but I definitely put a little bit extra in my audiobooks. I'm not just reading dry words off of a page. Anyways, join up if you're interested in that growth. If not, then, just listen. But I hope to see you guys tomorrow on the live stream, because I think that it's a great experience to be able to hang out with you guys and hear what you've gathered. But let's continue. So, see also color plate. That's what we just did. So we looked at Miss Prakriti in her beautiful unmanifest nature. Notice there's no ripples, there's no crusty calcification, none of that, because this is the unmanifest, right? So it talks about here the predominant guna, sattva, which is the awareness, the corresponding class of modification, quiescence. The resulting mental state of that, peace, illumination, insight. Now rajas, passion, right? The corresponding vritti, agitation. So when you got passion, desire, that's going to cause an agitation flavored vritti, right? See, this ain't no stuff you have to believe. This is just stuff you just pay attention to. Passion, desire leads to suffering, they say. That causes an agitation vritti. That leads to restlessness, agitation, and craving. Then there's tamas. The tamas vritti is stupidity. Stupidity causes a mental state of delusion, dullness, and torpor. So another cross reference I want to show because visuals help you guys. Let's see. I'm probably gonna need to have like a bigger angled camera so I can just catch all the stuff that I have scattered everywhere. I mean, it's not scattered to me because I know what it is and where it is and why it is. But just pulling this out, and I'm gonna show it on camera, and I'm not afraid to do so because everybody done seen it by now. We also have here modes of nature, the three gunas. Right, that's what we're talking about. We got rajas, sattva, and tamas. Tamas being ignorance, sattva being goodness, rajas being passion. I would even suggest writing these three down because this is gonna a lot of these terms. It's not like it's just one word that defines it, right? So that's something you got to kind of move away from. In English, it's easy to do it that way. In English, it's like, oh, okay, well, this means that. No, these words aren't English, so they're not. They're gonna mean a few different words. So be open to studying the phrases rajas, sattva, and tamas. Okay. Um, Thank you, Moldvox. So, just looking here at rajas, passion, right? Remember I said generator, operator, destroyer. That's another way to look at it, right? Let's start with God. G, generator, rajas, passion, growth. It's anabolic. It's agitated, selfish. Maybe even you could take a screenshot because you kids don't write stuff anymore, right? We just screenshot. You can screenshot rajas. Anabolic, agitated, selfish, passionate, active, restless, forceful, lustful, controlling. And the type of vritti that rajas causes is agitation. And the type of mental state that agitated vritti causes is restlessness, agitation, craving. Generator. Let's do operator, which is sattva. I like sattva. Sattva is nice and clean and peaceful. Sattva, the maintainer. Balance, metabolic, peaceful, universal, harmonious, equilibrium, wise, refined, good, truthful. The type of vritti that sattva causes is peace, quiescence. And the mental state that it causes is peace, illumination, insight. So we did generator, we did operator, let's do destroyer. That's tamas. Tamas, the destroyer and transformer. Decline, right? That's its function. Catabolic, tormented, foolish, angry, lazy, deluded, harmful, distorted, lying. The type of vritti it causes is stupidity, and the effect of mind that it causes is delusion, dullness, torpor. You're going to find that with the Vedic science, these different terms and words start to function as almost like math algebra type of symbols that you can add and combine and multiply. But basically, check this out. Rajas, Sattva, Tamas, the creator, the maintainer, the destroyer, generator, operator, destroyer. This is what Prakriti is composed of. Growth, balance, and decline. Growth, balance, and decline. That's describing a sine wave, right? A wave that is rising, reaches its peak, and then it decays. This is what reality is composed of, what Prakriti is composed of, right? So, I hope you took screenshots. Write these words down, Raja, Sattva, Tamas. Learn what they mean, because they're not going away. Whether you're talking about Vedic astrology or yoga, or if you plan on being somebody who watches my channel, these terms are going to come up, and they're kind of difficult to describe in just one definition, one defined word. So, let's continue. um, just an example. Let's see. we'll do a planet, for example. If you look at Mars, everyone kind of has an idea of what Mars is like, you know what I'm saying, as a planet, as an energy. Well, look at how the Vedic astrology describes it. You got this fire, the water element within the fire element, which is also known as pitta, operating in a rajas mode. And remember what we said about rajas being passionate, being active, right? Being it's agitated. This is what Mars does. This is what the energy of Mars is. All the different planets can be described by using combination of elements in a mode of rajas, tamas, or sattva. Right? Let's pick a different planet just so you can see, you know, one from a different perspective. Let's see, maybe Jupiter. Jupiter's considered sattvic, right? So down here you'll see sattva. That's Jupiter. Now, what's one that's tamasic? Can anybody guess what a tamasic planet would be? Can anybody guess what a tamasic planet would be? And if somebody guesses the one that I'm not thinking of, then you get a, well, there's two that I'm probably not going to say. Can anybody guess it? Uh-oh. Indeed, it is Saturn. Saturn is a tamasic planet. The one that I wasn't going to say, though, is Rahu and Ketu. They're actually both tamasic. Crazy. But notice how everyone's so scared of Saturn because Saturn's mean. It's not really mean. It just has a function in the universe. By the way, just understanding again that all this stuff isn't random. This isn't just like different stuff that we're bouncing back and forth. Like I'm talking about this one day and something else the next day. You will also find Saturn here as Bina, right? So this is another shade of description for Bina, right? When you start to connect these dots, it makes more sense than anywhere you have ever looked because nobody has put all these pieces together in the same way. So there's a reason why we're going over this Vedic stuff right now because this is the missing piece of the puzzle, but one piece at a time. All right, so yeah, we were just talking about the different gunas and their relationship with the type of vrittis they create, right? The draws of Tahuti. Quiescent modifications, which come from sattva, remember, are predominantly sattvic and reflect the eliminative, peaceful qualities of that guna. Their arousal generates serenity and mental stability, stharya, karya sthrayam, and can give rise to some or all of the following additional qualities: large-heartedness, tolerance, detachment, patience, uprightness, discrimination, dispassion, compassion, and other virtues. All right, that's the sattva. Agitated modifications, that's the rajas, are predominantly rajasic, generating restlessness, attachment, craving for things, clinging to people, passion or lust, greed, and other such inferior qualities. Now, notice and keep in mind here, when I talk about these different flavors of vrittis, they cause different reactions, right? So the purpose isn't to kill or get rid of all the vrittis, because then you couldn't live. You have to have them in order to operate in this body. But what we want to do is reduce new ones from forming and reduce the ones that are very, 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 disturbing. So sattvic vrittis are the ones that you want to generate. Rajasic ones are the ones that cause you problems, and tamasic ones are the ones that destroy you, right? So again, when we talk about sattvic vrittis, sattvic ripples, right? Sattvic modifications and fluctuations of consciousness, those are going to produce large-heartedness, right? You're gonna have a lot of love for more and more people, tolerance, right? You're not judgmental, you're not racist, you're not discriminative in a negative, hateful way. Detachment, vairagya, right? You're not affected by the foolishness of this human race. There's plenty of foolishness now. That doesn't mean becoming cold and callous. That means you're not affected by the nonsense. I hope some of you know the difference. I know you do, of course, but some people don't, obviously. Patience, uprightness, discrimination, dispassion, compassion, and other virtues. Those are the type of vrittis, or the type of transformations that come from the Sattvic Vrittis. Agitated modifications that deal with rajas, rajasic flavored vibrations are going to cause restlessness, attachment, right? We talked last time about love. A lot of people don't know the difference between love and attachment. They think that attachment is love. They think you cannot have love without attachment. Craving for things, clinging to people. That's not love. That's not love. Love happens whether or regardless of your involvement with the person. If it's love, it doesn't matter what happens next. Literally. It's called unconditional love, right? Passion or lust. Everybody knows that one. Greed and other such inferior qualities. He called them inferior. Modifications in the class of stupidity, which comes from Thomas, are predominantly tamasic, generating delusion, anger, fear, arrogance, ignorance, harshness, negligence, indolence, and other such vices. These are people that are operating on the lowest frequency of the three. And it rightly is a pyramid because there's a whole lot more people on the bottom than there are in the top. But it doesn't take very many people at the top to change the rest of the pyramid. Just keep that in mind. Keep it in mind. Keep it in mind. All right. Christy Miamore asks, question, do I need to sign up for the book club if I'm already in Inner Light? Yes, because those are going to be two different things. Moby, greetings, greetings. Good evening. A constantly fluctuating alchemical equation. Yes. All right, you guys, let's get to the next part here because honestly, we're almost done with this chapter. I just really took my time with it because I think that there's a lot of valuable information here. And this stuff is so profound and so important that it doesn't take much of it to really start making changes in your world. Like, for real. It doesn't take much to really start looking at your life and seeing some of the things that you could make better. So let's continue. Let's continue. And again, I appreciate you guys being here with me, hanging out, you know what I'm saying, and just listening and commenting and giving me your take on this. Like, obviously, I have this book, I read it already, I know this stuff myself, but I enjoy being able to share this information and talk about it. It just adds, you know, it's something different. Something different. It brings it to life on a new level when we're able to, you know, circulate on this information. But let's continue. The type of modifications reflect evolutionary development. 1000%. Every unliberated being experience quiescent or sattvic, agitated or rajasic, and stupid tamasic modifications of consciousness, which reflect underlying karmic tendencies. Now, this book has a great chapter on karma, and we'll probably get into it when we go over this book, which is another great book on karma. I can't wait to help clarify karma because a lot of people have a very ignorant view on karma because they only got it from an angry YouTuber as opposed from where karma came from. The more that you study, the more options you have. But yeah, these modifications of consciousness reflect underlying karmic tendencies. No being within the realm of conditioned existence is entirely sattvic, rajasic, or tamasic, but rather possesses those qualities in varying proportions according to its relative level of evolutionary development. Even the basest and most tamasic person experiences modifications that are rajasic or sattvic. Likewise, even a genuinely sattvic individual will at times be subject to the arousal of modifications of consciousness that are rajasic or tamasic. The nature of the three gunas is such that they are continually fluctuating, alternately becoming dominant or latent within an individual's mind according to their respective proportional strengths within that individual. The relative proportions of these three primal qualities within an individual reflects one's degree of evolutionary maturity. The relative, right? The relative proportions, meaning how much one is compared to the other, right? So you may have 75% of sattvic vrittis. That's great in comparison to the other 25%, which is tamasic and rajasic. Or hell, you may have 50% rajasic, right, and 10% sattvic. But the relative proportions of these primal qualities within an individual, whatever your percentage is, that reflects your degree of evolutionary maturity. So it's not so much what you can memorize as far as books and words and what somebody said. It's about the percentage and the proportion of whether or not we're talking about your peaceful vrittis, your agitated vrittis, or your stupid vrittis, right? This is not my judgment. You can look at somebody and tell by how they behave on a basic level whether most of their mental fluctuations, their vibrations, are of a stupid nature, of an agitated nature, or of a peaceful nature, right? You can tell. It's not me. I'm not casting judgment on nobody. You can tell just by listening to a person and dealing with a person and watching their life, right? What kind of, you know, you know, it's self-evident. So that's how you can tell um, about spiritual evolution and karma and that kind of thing. It's just displayed in how you process through your reality. How attached are you, and how transformed do you become by this experience? All right, so it reflects one's degree of evolutionary maturity. One in whom tamasic tendencies prevail with only some rajasic and some sattvic traits can be considered a young soul. And again, it's nothing that's like, oh, look at those muggles and those stupid humans. No, 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 no. This is about how long you've been here. And like I said before, like, you know, some people just graduated from being monkeys, dogs, cats, penguins, deer, right? Some people just graduated from the animal kingdom and they behave as such. And that's okay. Whereas there are some of us who have been here for so many lifetimes that it's time to go, right? Some of us have been here for so long. I shit, I can't get out of here fast enough. And that's not because, oh, it hurts, but because we're done. We're done. There ain't too much more for me to do on this dimension except read books. But let's continue. One in whom tamasic tendencies prevail, with only some rajasic and a few sattvic traits, can be considered a young soul. Such a soul has not yet spent very many incarnations in human form, and thus retains a large proportion of the traits that enabled it to survive in its many incarnations as an animal. An old soul, on the other hand, is one who has spent many lifetimes in human form, developing a predominantly sattvic personality, having spent many incarnations, tasting of life's bittersweet pleasures and mastering all of life's conventional roles. An old soul becomes tired and jaded with the endless cycles of pursuing, attaining, and enjoying rajasic goals. Such an individual has now largely dropped tamasic behavioral tendencies, and while rajasic sense pleasures still offer some temptation, they are negligible. An old soul is now almost exclusively attracted to the knowledge, sweetness, and serenity that derive from sattvic pursuits. Can I get an amen? Can I get a hallelujah? The speed at which a human being evolves through its tamasic and rajasic phases of development depends largely upon the degree to which it decides to consciously or unconsciously adopt the sattvic practices of eternal religion, dharma. If even a very tamasic soul consciously adopts the practice of religious virtues like mantra chanting, for example, that practice will generate a powerful flow of sattva within that individual. Having once tasted of the sweetness of sattva, that soul will strive to repeat the experience again and again. Thus, its passage into the predominantly sattvic state of human life will be relatively rapid if it develops a strong taste for sattva that causes it to disdain rajasic and tamasic pleasures. So you want to talk about saving souls and helping people evolve and all that stuff. Is not going to be by beating them on the head and telling them to stop eating meat. It's not going to be telling them to look at somebody's YouTube channel. It's not going to be none of that. It's going to be introducing them into different sattvic activities that are going to cause sattvic ripples in their chitta, sattvic vrittis. If you're able to cause illumination and peace and insight within somebody, that can only be done through love. That can only be done through compassion. And that can only be done if you've reached it yourself. You feel me? So it's not going to be from any external thing. You're not going to save people by anything external. Nothing in the world is going to save nobody, right? So it's not a book that you can tell them to read because you know they ain't going to read it. And if they do read it, they have to understand it, right? The reason that these books help me is because they cause sattvic ripples in my chitta, right? It's not the information, it's the peace that it causes. It's the ripples that they cause. Now, can I produce those in you? I can lead you to some. Hopefully, I can help lead you to those ripples. That's what causes rapid evolution. That's what helps save people lifetimes of stress and suffering. You can literally save people lifetimes of stress and suffering if you can help them to develop a sattvic vibration, right? This information, if you're of a level to understand it, can literally cut lifetimes of suffering. That's why Swami Sivananda said that the best thing a human being can do is teach yoga. That's the best thing that you can do for the human race. Period. Let's continue. Good. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go. This planet is ghetto. No, it's not. It's a wonderful place. But I'm ready to go back to sleep. So I've been here long enough. One in whom sattva has become ascendant naturally enjoys an abundance of good qualities. The mind is usually bright and clear, the body healthy and good looking. Well, that doesn't describe me. I don't know what does. The person is cheerful, patient, loving, possessed of good memory and sharp intellect. People instinctively trust such an individual. When he or she speaks, people listen. But even in a sattvic individual, the indulgence in rajasic or tamasic behavior can cause a rapid erosion of the subconscious predominance of sattvic karmas from which superior qualities derive. One lifetime's indulgence in sin and pleasure could require 3 or 4 subsequent lifetimes of effort to offset it. Yeah. Now, I'm not really big into like past lives, but I'm pretty damn sure that I made it further than I have, and I took a lifetime to go back and enjoy some sin. I but that's a whole nother story. But notice what it says there. It says that in a sattvic individual, the indulgence in rajasic, which is passionate, or tamasic, which is stupid behavior, can cause a rapid erosion of the subconscious predominance of the sattvic karma from which the superior qualities come from. One lifetime's indulgence in the bullshit, one lifetime's indulgence in the nonsense, one lifetime's indulgence in sin and pleasure could require 3 or 4 subsequent lifetimes of effort to offset it. That shows you how important it is to maintain your frame. You feel me? This is why the sages teach that one must eschew rajasic and tamasic temptations, which only tarnish the soul and erode positive qualities. In the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says, the gate to hell leading the soul to ruin is threefold: lust, anger, and greed. Therefore, one should abandon these three. Yes, I agree with that. Again, when asked by Arjuna as to what impels a man as if by force to commit sin, Lord Krishna replies, it is this lust, this anger, born of rajas, a mighty devourer and most sinful. Know that to be the enemy here in this world. Therefore, one desirous of evolutionary progress, who wants both to improve the conditions of his or her next birth and to develop knowledge, love, and contentment, should strive to make the quality of sattva ascendant in his or her nature through the practice of eternal religion, dharma. Mastery of eternal religion will give rise to the intense, wholehearted longing for liberation, and the other qualities necessary for the practice of yoga, the last great adventure within conditioned existence. Neat. Yoga is the last great adventure in this conditioned existence. We're almost done, y'all. We are almost out. Just like we got 2 paragraphs to finish reading and we're done with this video, we only got just a little bit more time to go in this incarnation, in this wheel of samsara. That's why I'm trying to figure out this trail hard, so you know, I'll have a comfortable flight. I like that. The last great adventure within conditioned existence, which will eventually take the individual beyond the wheel of birth and death itself to establish blissful oneness with the self. To accomplish that final aim, however, one will first need to remove from the body, mind, and spirit all of the dross accumulated through countless births. Only when all such impurities have been removed will one be able to completely still all the modifications of consciousness and enter the final state of radiant superconsciousness to which there is no end. Okay, so did you guys learn from that? Did you guys enjoy that? I think some of the things that I enjoyed about that chapter was how it talked about what sin actually is, about what impurity actually is, about what what dirtiness and whatnot actually is. Because even in Tatwashuddhi, she says that no act, no thing in itself is actually impure, right? Right here she says, Tantra believes that no act or thought is impure in itself. The impurity lies in erroneous perception and judgment. I was very happy to see that because it makes sense, right? How can a person sit here and tell you what is sin and what is impure and what is, you know what I'm saying? Because while a man may make rules, there's somebody on the other side of the planet who is celebrated for doing the same thing. So that's the wrong answer. The right answer is looking at it from a spiritual perspective, from a higher perspective. The soul, undifferentiated consciousness, God within man, it sins the more that it interacts with the external world and identifies with it, believes in it, right? The more that these modifications and transformations take place due to the interaction with this world, and the soul believes that it is those changes, that it is transforming, that's the illusion. The sin is ignorance and illusion, because the more that we become confused and the more that we believe that we are the body and the mind and the emotions, the more that we get tossed and turned by that monkey mind, because we're not even the monkey, we're the banana getting squeezed. The more that we play around with that, the more that we accumulate and call more confusion towards us. Like it gets worse and worse. It's like a slippery slope. That's what sin is. That's why it's sin, because it keeps the soul trapped in bondage, trapped within matter, right? And the inner purification of practices like Tatwa Shuddhi is not just visualizing shapes. The process begins to help the soul know itself. And that's important because the more that the soul knows itself, it knows what it's not. And it is not this body. To be honest, matter is inert and lifeless and inanimate without the soul's involvement. Like matter needs the soul to, like my hand needs the soul to do any of this. This ain't gonna happen without soul to do it and to perceive it and to feel it. But I would be confused to say, oh, this is my hand. You know, let's not be ridiculous. Obviously, this hand is attached to the body vehicle machine that my soul is using, but what I am is infinitely more than that. And what you are is infinitely more than the eyes that are looking at the phone and the ears listening to my voice. You're infinitely more than that. What I also enjoyed about this was just learning about the different types of modifications, the different types of vibrations and vrittis. That it's not just like, you know, a generalized vritti. It's like there's multiple types. Just like before, I was happy to learn that, because before I was all about, you know, oh, you gotta change your subconscious mind and you gotta hack into the subconscious mind, and like, you know, I didn't really at the time know too much what the hell the subconscious mind was, but it was good to kind of understand that there's multiple parts of the self. So that the same way that I had that realization, it's good to know that there's multiple vrittis. It's not just a vritti, a vibration. There's types, right? There's right knowledge, there's wrong knowledge, there's imagination, there's sleep, and I believe ignorance was the fourth one. But it's good to know that there's actually different types. Here we go. Um, memory was the fifth one. Good. So there's right knowledge, wrong knowledge, imagination, sleep, and memory. Those are 5 different types of um, uh, vrittis. And alongside that, there's also these 3 categories of vrittis, right? The pure ones, the agitated ones, and the stupid ones. Stupid is a funny word to me. My mom told me that not to call people stupid because that was very, very disrespectful. And I understand now also, you know, I still don't call people stupid. I don't think anyone's stupid. but I do understand that a lot of people are heavily influenced by many different things, and some of them being raw emotion that has been built up over a lifetime. And while the behavior that one may exhibit could be considered stupid, everyone is really and truly reacting and trying to move towards pleasure and run away from pain. I know that. So it becomes hard to really judge people and call them stupid when you understand that, and also the different levels of consciousness that you know, that that's talked about in this book. Some people really can't find their way out of the loops that they're trapped in. So I can't call somebody stupid when they don't have enough energy to find their way out. Instead of judging, it's infinitely better to try to help any way that I can. So yeah, I did enjoy this chapter, and it was good to be able to share it. And I'm happy to see that some of you guys also enjoyed. So good, 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 good. Wouldn't it be interesting if, like, we rose and fell in past lives multiple times? Like, multiple times, reaching enlightenment and then choosing to fall backwards heavy. That would suck. How many times have we made it to this point? How many times have we said, "Oh, I'm not coming back to this plane," right? I mean, hell, how do we know, right? All we can do is really just focus on what's going on right here, right now. Travis, I just signed up for the book club. Please see my inbox to you in the academy. Yes, ma'am, I will certainly do. Moldvox says, I've been a magician before. And quite honestly, I think that we all have. I think that we all have. You know what I'm saying? Like, nobody's going to be attracted to any of this information unless we have had some experience in this in past lives before. Like, because again, we're talking about karma here. We're not talking about, like, no one just randomly comes to this information, right? Nobody just randomly falls into this information. Like, you have had to have, it's in you and it's on you, and the soul is yearning for it. Just like what it was saying here about an ignorant person, a tamasic person who has a taste of sattva and seeks more of it. You know, we have tasted heavy sattva before, and we all want it again. That's why we're all circulating around the same subject matter, and we're just trying our best to find it again. And we will. This is a pretty good stream. No, I don't mean the YouTube, but I mean, like, the current that is underneath us all, that's moving us, right? This particular stream is a good one. So yeah, stay confident. Stay confident, because we're in there like swimwear. So look, tomorrow is going to be the first book study group of the year. It's going to be chapter 1 of The Paths of Pravriti and Nivriti. Um, yeah, yeah, go ahead and sign up if you have not done so. And we will be going live 1 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm going to cut the camera on. I'm going to talk a little bit about the chapter, and then I'm going to open the floor to everybody to talk about it. Um, just try not to talk for a whole hour. Just let everybody have a back and forth. It's a conversation. So we want this to be a fair thing. I might have to do some refereeing this year, because I do enjoy everyone, but I do know that some people do, I guess, shy away if they feel like they're not welcome. And I want everyone to feel welcome. So please join and feel welcome. Don't be scared to speak up, because that's the whole point of having this thing, right? Remember these terms because they're important. The more you know, the more options you have, the better you're able to move. The knowledge doesn't necessarily save you, but like I said, you have more options at least. And with more options, you can make better decisions. Everything in due time, Miss Uppity Unicorn. Woo! But yeah, life is good. Life is good, everybody. Trust in your unconscious that it knows what it's doing. You have been brought this far for a reason, and you're not gonna just be dropped and left desolate and alone. It's not how this game works. Other people may gripe and complain and say that's what happened to them, but that's not what happens to you. So stay confident. Trust your source. Trust your inner soul that it knows where it's trying to take you. Trust it. Let it take you where it's trying to take you. Keep your eyes open. Keep your third eye open. And stop being so scared. Because sometimes the things that come to you may be different than what you're used to, but that doesn't mean that it's your enemy or it's going to hurt you. Really, the higher that you rise, the higher that you come to acknowledge this higher self, the more you realize that there is nothing out there that's really your enemy. That all these things are aspects of yourself, and this is something like a school where you're learning. But at the end of the day, trust your inner self. Okay, so I am about to get up off of here and take a little nap so that I can wake up and get on the live stream tomorrow. I hope that you guys enjoyed. I always enjoy this. Like, this is what I do all day anyway, so it doesn't make too much difference to turn the camera on while I do it. It's just nice to know that you guys are able to benefit from it in some way, right? Probably do this more often if you guys want to. If you guys are willing to hang out with me, probably do this more often. I'm definitely still gonna be finishing Ladder of Lights. Just took a bit of a detour because we've started the passive Vrittis and Vrittis, so I figured it'd be good to read about some Vrittis. And maybe those of you who are joining for the first time will have a little bit more to talk about. So I'll see you guys tomorrow afternoon at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Hopefully you'll join me on the camera and talk about what you thought. What you thought. Okie doke. If you're able to find a copy of this book, let me know. Because, like I said, I only found 3 more and they're only like almost gone. All right, so thank you guys again for hanging out. I really, really hope that you enjoyed, and I hope that, this helps you feel better, do better, live better. That's the point. That's the whole point. I want to help you cause some sattvic, I want to help you have some sattvic vrittis percolating inside of the chitta. Okie doke. I'm out. Peace, you guys. Thank you for coming. This is TK Trav, aka Travis Magus, here with LVX777. Peace. Prakriti, prakriti.